record. Okay, this is module 2, part 1, and welcome everybody. And this is just so that everybody knows, and I apologize in advance that I know I'm making things more confusing. As you know, when I do these classes, I do them with lots of consultation and consideration of the ancestors. And the ancestors don't play by the book. So my idea was the teacher idea that, okay, so we have a lecture on 1 week and 2 weeks later we have the class discussion. And the ancestors said, no, that's not how we're going to do it this time. So we'll see where things go. I'm no longer going to make those kind of plans. So this is a 2-part class. So this week is part 1, and in 2 weeks we'll do part 2. So we'll have discussion tonight. That discussion will probably bleed over into the part 2, because they're part of the same topic and same experience. So let me go ahead and start the share screen. And let me move the film strip over there. Okay, I think that'll be perfect. Is everybody seeing the screen? Okay, good. So tonight's topic is esotericism and magic from an Afro-Sicilian perspective. And it may sound like, oh, why are we talking about this? We've been talking about this for the last, year, 2 years. As we talk tonight, I think it'll make a little bit more sense on what I'm unpacking here. And yes, I realize that I was there. Cannabis might have been involved in the choosing of the design of these slides because they're extremely colorful, but that is also with intention because of what we're talking about tonight. So what we're going to talk about, we're going to look at the actual metaphysical, etheric, and esoteric principles at work in our tradition. So all of Stregoneria 101 was about the sort of the historic and cultural foundation of our tradition, what our grandparents would have done, what our great-grandparents and ancestors further back than that would have done. Now we're actually doing a deeper dive, looking at the principles behind it. And so we're going to redefine magic in a sense tonight, a reminder that I think will kind of change everything for you. And so put a pin in that, because there may have been in the last year, for those who've been through the whole Stregoneria 101 course, or in the last few months for those who are, in the middle or just starting that course, there may have been times when you've just said, this is interesting, but it just doesn't resonate with me. Like, it's not, I can't see myself doing, having a bowl and some olive oil and the salt and doing the molecule removal. I just can't imagine, carrying a bowl around with me all the time. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about that. And the second point is going to be, why do some practitioners get frustrated and manifest weaker results? And this is important too, because I don't want to see anybody get frustrated enough to just give up on themselves, or think there's something you're doing wrong, or think that you're just not teachable or anything else. I promise you that everybody that's in this course, that is not true about. And then the overarching focus of tonight's session is refining our approach, so that folks really do understand that I'm not here, as the Gestapo to beat you over the head and say, you got to do it the way your grandparents did it, because I don't do it the way my grandparents did it. And it's a little bit of a tricky dance in the modern era, where we have more words to express things like cultural appropriation, open practice, closed practice, where we want to be sensitive to other cultures. And sometimes that can almost box us into a corner. And we want to talk about that tonight, because, more than anything for me, and this is, especially poignant in this moment with stuff that happened today, I don't want anyone to feel like I'm dictating your magical practice to you. This is not how anybody should ever teach magic. This is not, I just can't even imagine a world in which we all did magic the exact same way. It's why some other traditions don't resonate with me, because I've never been somebody who wanted someone to put me under their thumb and say, you got to do A, B, C, and D, or else it's not going to work, because we know better. We've experienced it in our lives. So let's dig in. This should sound familiar to everybody, just slightly different packaging. But when we talk about magic in the Afro-Sicilian traditions, magic or fatuchiere and witchcraft, stregoneria, are words that are generally used, as I've said before, by outsiders to describe our innate ability to work with the energy around people and circumstances and places and conditions and other beings, in order to influence and change the outcome. You've heard me say in the beginning of Stregoneria 101 that all magic is working with the energy around these things to shift it to our will. That's a concept that's very uniquely old world European, but that we can find even further back in the African traditions. We can find it in traditions around the world. In every folk magic practice, they have a way that unique to their culture of basically saying the same thing. And even in 19th and 20th century esotericism and occultism, Aleister Crowley would pick up on that and make that a centerpiece of his tradition. So tonight we're going to talk a lot about spell work, and in Italian we call that sortileggio. So the use of sortileggio or spells are considered to include any and all of the available means, including the ones that you make up in that moment that maybe nobody else has ever done before, that we have to redirect our energy to create that shift. I was explaining before the class started, when Annette and I were talking, that a friend of mine, or Craig's best friend, was over, and I talked to him about the reason for different things that are on the ancestral altar this week, and talked to him about the bubbles in the water, and he said, well, what if I do it and there's no bubbles in the water? And I said, wait, let's first look at this. We're using this as a tool. The ancestors don't have to make bubbles in the water if you have some other way of knowing you're connecting with them. This is just our way of kind of anchoring to that moment. And I said, look, I'm going to show you something right now. Get me another glass of water, but before you pour it, let me just say that I want to ask the ancestors to not put bubbles in the water, to not come into this space in this moment, so that I can demonstrate something to you. And I put a glass of water, and I said, now, when I say bubbles in the water, watch the bubbles come in the water. And I did, and I demonstrated it to him. And I said, because this is all the energy. So when we bring our consciousness to that, we're saying when the ancestors are here, the bubbles will appear in the water. We're anchoring it to a condition. Bubbles won't appear until my ancestors are present. That just lets us know it's time to take the next step. So your spells can include incantations, something like the glass of water, candle work, creating curios or talismans, energy work, potion crafting, and as I said, sigil work. As I said, whatever it is that works for you. You may have a means of working a spell that nobody in history has ever done before, and that's absolutely valid. Whatever it is that helps you focus your intention is considered a valid spell for the sake of our tradition. So why don't spells work? Well, in some pop culture forms of witchcraft, there's a belief that any spell will work, including the ones that are in fictional books, like the books of Terry Pratchett, like Harry Potter, or Charmed, or any of those, anything else that, the Craft, that any of those spells, light as a board, whatever it is, light as a feather, heavy as a board, or whatever the hell it is, like all of those things can work. Others will argue that using a spell from any book that you know to be fiction won't work because you know that it's fiction. So you're in your mind, you're already saying, this incantation from Harry Potter is fiction, so it won't work. And tonight, I'm here to tell you that both of those things are correct. They will work and they won't work. It's not whether it's in a book of fiction or not. The real trick is you and your belief. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So that's one of the reasons we use plant allies, because in our tradition, the garden and the kitchen is an easier space for us to cultivate awareness around something we already know, something that's already familiar, something that's not woo-woo or scary, or we don't have other outside forces like, parents that aren't in the tradition, or family members not in the tradition, or spouses not in the tradition saying, don't do that, that's evil. Don't play with that Ouija board. It's, it's evil. A real life story about that is in my family. My mother's sister was playing with a Ouija board in a house that we all knew was haunted. Everybody believed and understood that, but the family believed, her family believed that when you play with the Ouija board, you're inviting the Christian devil in. As a result, when she played with the Ouija board one night and called this spirit who killed somebody in that house, and she already knew that wasn't like a mystery that got solved that night. But she called that spirit, and because of her belief system, she spontaneously caught fire. Her clothes caught on fire, but the only place on her body that was burned was where she was wearing her crucifix. So that's why my mother and her sister's whole family swore off witchcraft forever because of that singular event. And we could easily unpack that to understand my aunt manifested exactly what happened out of her fear. So we use things like kitchen witchery in the Italian tradition because we have a long history of anecdotal evidence, proof that herbs and roots and flowers and things like that and vegetables are part of healing. We have a history of correspondences. The kidney bean is helpful because it looks like a kidney. And then science has proven that some of those correspondences actually make sense, that there's ingredients in the kidney bean that are very healthful to your kidneys. And we have scientific evidence of how plants heal us. And the further in history forward we go, the more evidence we find that the witchcraft of old actually works. That if you take thyme and peppermint and make and boil it and make a tea and drink it with a little bit of honey, it literally breaks up. That was the cure for pneumonia in the Italian tradition. Well, scientifically, we now know that the reason you use mint is that the phenols in the mint release the thymol that's in the thyme, without which that it would remain bound to the thyme itself, and that thyme and mint itself are antibacterial and they are decongestant. So that's why it would help with pneumonia, because if you're decongesting the lungs, you're breaking things down, that pneumonia is going to pass, and that using the heat of the water and the honey, you help bring down the fever. So in the debate about using fictional books, whether they're whether or not they work, whether or not you should use them, is really a matter of understanding whether you view magic as a worldview or as a religion. And this is really important. And many of you have heard me say it before. And it's not that I'm out to pick on neo-pagans. And it's the reason I refer to them as neo-pagans, because in the real pagan world, in the ancient world, one, we don't know everything about it because they didn't write everything down in books. And what's practiced today doesn't even remotely resemble the way that the traditions were practiced in the old world, unless you're in a folk magic tradition where those practices remained intact. Like the African diasporic religions are practiced intact for thousands of years. What we call paganism today is actually neo-paganism. It's a reconstruction in which they tried to, old white men in the late 40s and 50s tried to reconstruct what they imagined the tradition looked like in the old world. So the religious view which is what neo-paganism is, would tend toward a reliance on spells or ritual work, almost from a superstitious perspective, without necessarily understanding how the spell worked, because religion is basically a realm of fundamentalism. It's dogma. It's doctrinal. So it's not uncommon for people to judge their way as real magic and somebody else's way as not real magic, because they have a construct and a set of rules that their magic abides by, and anything outside that set of rules must therefore not be part of it. It's the reason, if we look outside of the realm of magic, in the history of the people of Israel, don't eat milk and meat on the same plate, in the same the same serving, the same bowl. And it wasn't that eating milk and meat was really condemned by their God, but in the ancient world, you only got one bowl to eat your whole meal out of. And you didn't have a microwave oven or a grill. You cooked over a fire, and you cooked most of your meat relatively rare. And which is one of the reasons why you don't eat pork, because pork can't be eaten rare, or you're going to end up with trichinosis. So if you had, a steak, and you put that in a bowl, and you added milk, which wasn't pasteurized back then. They didn't go to the dairy to get it. They went to the cow to get it. It's going to curdle. And when you put milk and dairy in your stomach, it curdles in your stomach. So these rules, that these dietary rules of the ancient Israelites and the Judeans were based on common sense practices. And a lot of the ritual and doctrine of religious witchcraft, if we look deep enough, is based on some of the same common sense practices to preserve those people, so something bad didn't happen to them. So for those who are religious, they're going to believe that that a spell from Harry Potter will never work. Now, you might have tried a spell from Harry Potter that didn't work, but the reason that it didn't work isn't because the spell was in a fictitious book. It's that you believe that the spell was fiction. And so put a pin in that too. You're going to have lots of pins by the time the night's over, but we'll slowly unpack them. But if you understand, as we do, that in the Italian and Afro-Sicilian tradition, that all magic is real all the time, and that our idea of magic is a worldview rather than a religion. So you believe that the way that the plants heal us is magical, that the way that the seasons change is magical, that magic isn't this woo-woo thing. It's the essence of the cosmos. It's the energy, like Einstein would say in 1913, that this vast unquantifiable reservoir of energy that couldn't be measured, that we didn't understand below the atomic level. He called it 0-point energy. That was what our ancestors would call magic, this stuff from which everything manifests. And if in that case, any spell you use, if you imbue it with your energy and your intention, can manifest at will. And in a class that I did a couple of years ago, or quite a few years ago now, actually, it was probably 15 years ago when Deathly Hallows came out. I was teaching a class on witchcraft and told the class we were going to do a spell that when they went home, they could see their protective totem. And I said, that's just a Patronus in Harry Potter. And if you do, I want you to just use the particular spell from Harry Potter, and you'll manifest it. And people were amazed, because they're like, I can't believe that she put a real spell in Harry Potter. And I said, it's all spells are real and all spells are unreal. It's a matter of your belief. It's a matter of your intention. You expected to manifest your spirit animal or your spirit guide. And so that's what came. The words, you could make up a language as she did. But this is this is a way that this might be a little bit crazy. This might be my autism making me think that this is going to make sense, but I want to hear your feedback afterwards. I was looking for a way to explain this. Let's say you're in the market for a new car and you go to the showroom. Let's say you really love a Honda, and you go to the showroom and you see the car that is the perfect Honda for you. I have no idea why I decided to use cars, because I'm really not a car person. So I know that there's a Honda Accord. We have a Honda. I don't even know what it is. A RAV4. Okay. Oh, that's Toyota. That's what we have. So let's say you go to the Toyota dealership and there's a RAV4 and you want it, and it's a hybrid, and you know it's going to get great gas mileage, and you know that it has all the features you want, and it has the little things that when Craig drives and his Parkinson's meds are wearing off, will tell him if he's swerving a little bit. It'll beep and it'll pull you back to make your driving experience safer. You don't go to the showroom to test drive and see if the car actually turns over or see if it works. You go to a showroom expecting that every car that's going to be on there, on that showroom floor, is going to work. You already know that cars work, that this thing that's shaped like a car, if you, nowadays you don't even need a key, but if you have the key in your pocket and you push the button, the car is going to turn over and it's going to drive. So test driving a car is not an experiment to see if it works. But that's the way that people approach magic. Oh, I have a spell. Let's do the spell and see if it works. And if you wonder why the spells most of the time don't work when you take that approach, it's because you're not working magic, you're doing an experiment. That's how a non-believer might approach a spell. But when we do a spell, we take responsibility. The reason that we provided all of you in the Sfigolaria 101 course with spells and correspondences and guidance on working with spirits isn't so that you could experiment and see if they work. It's, we told you that they work. We know that they work, that I've, for 52 years have seen that they work. And so I shared with you the things that I know work. And they only work when you accept that magic is all around you and expresses itself in us, through us, and all around the cosmos all the time. So there isn't a period of time when magic doesn't work. It doesn't only work on Tuesdays from 8 until 10 and Wednesdays from 4 until 7. It works all the time for everybody. And that's why the ancestors wouldn't have necessarily called themselves Fatukiere or Strega, because we believed everybody could do that magic. We just happened to know how. We happen to have cultivated the practice. So some of the students that have taken the 101 course have experimented with spells. And, they saw the candle spell or the ancestral spell and they experimented. Now, some of the times when they experimented, they got results, and a couple students who are no longer with us on the platform right now have left because they got scared by that. And outsiders, just as has happened throughout time, scared them by saying, "Oh, that's the devil who doesn't exist. You're playing with witchcraft. The devil's going to get you. You're going to go to hell. You can't serve witchcraft and Jesus or whoever your God is." But sometimes experimenting gives us the opportunity to see that it's real, but your results are going to be tepid. So what you really want to do, and if you did that, if you looked at the stuff in the 101 course and you kind of experimented, you dabbled a little bit with it, don't beat yourself up. It's really natural. It's part of the process of learning to do that. It just so happened, the reason I don't approach things that way, remember, I started when I was 6 years old. So I'm sure, since I can't remember everything I did from the time I was 6 until today, that there were tons of times that I didn't necessarily believe what my aunts and grandmothers were telling me. And I dabbled, I experimented. And when I saw, oh, wow, this really does work. And if I sit with this plant, the plant really is going to begin to cultivate a relationship with me and me with the plant. The next time I sat with the plant, I didn't have to experiment anymore. I already knew that it worked. That's why in the 101 course, I kept telling everybody, you're going to discover your way of magic, because it's not that your way of magic is necessarily different than mine. It's that your approach and where you put your effort and where you put your focus is going to be different than mine. Whatever you decide to do is going to be strictly on you. So there's a quote from a book called Condensed Chaos, an introduction to chaos magic. And we're going to tie this in later in this course, how chaos magic drew very, very heavily on the Italian and the Afro-Sicilian tradition. And this book was written by a guy by the name of Phil Hine. And he says, magic is a doorway through which we step into mystery, wildness, and imminence. And I love that, because I think for me, it's the best description of what magic is. There's nothing woo-woo about what he says. There's nothing doctrinal and dogmatic. It's quite the opposite. We're stepping into, we call this in Buddhism, we refer to this as crazy wisdom. We're stepping into wildness and imminence. And that's where the sovereignty of our magic comes in. So a couple of the ideas then I want to tie this into is a picture always reinforces the concept. So that's why we use sigils and runes and other sacred imagery, statues. You see Ereshkigal on my ancestral altar at this time of year. The reason for that, you see Buddha would be on my ancestral altar on All Hallows Eve. Followed by at midnight, Buddha goes back to the other altar and Ereshkigal comes in, because Ereshkigal is the symbol, is the emblem, and the entity that I work with that is related to the underworld. So for some of you, that might be Proserpino, Persephone. For others, it may be, any of the other pantheon. This just happens to be the image that strikes the chord in my heart, that resonates with me. And we use these to reinforce our intention. The image itself isn't the magic. The image is what we use to initiate our receptiveness to cultivating a relationship. The entities, the ancient ones, the ancestors, the orishas, gods and goddesses, however you want to refer to them, are there for us, whether we're aware of their presence and they're working on our behalf or not. But the effectiveness of our work is going to be dependent on our willingness to do two things. One, to stop being all about the gimme, 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 because think of any relationship in your life. If there's somebody that you see that every time you see them, they got their hand out, they want, what are you going to do for me? How often are you going to want to be around that person? So these old ones are going to be the same way. Oh, here comes John Michael again. What's he going to want this time? Compared to when you say, let me cultivate a relationship with you, and your ancestors of blood especially are the same way. If you approach them and say, what can I do for you? What can I do in this world that you can no longer do in this world? Is there something I can do? Sometimes it's something as simple at this time of year. And my ancestors will say, do you think it would be too much for you to go out to Philadelphia and take care of so-and-so's grave because nobody goes there anymore? Or do you think you can, take a meal to so-and-so? One of the messages I got from an ancestor is to call somebody I hadn't thought about in years. They're a distant relative, cousin to me. And they said, her kids don't call her. Nobody else calls her. Most of her friends are dead. Pick up the phone and call her and just let her know you were thinking of her this time of year. And so I did that today, just to, say, hey, I haven't talked to you in a while. I see you on Facebook once in a while. She happens to be a relative that doesn't practice in a big time way. She does the little things that we do, making the gravy, does little prayers as a little ancestral altar, but she's a little scared of some of the more metaphysical stuff that we do. but just reaching out to her wasn't just good for her because somebody, showed that they cared. It was good for me. It was it deepened my connection to a whole other side of my ancestors that I don't think about because they're her people. Like they're the further away we sometimes forget. And the further away we go, especially to the ancient ancestors, the more important it is to do that work of cultivating the relationship, put the work in. And I swear to you, if you do that, they'll be there for you in ways that you can't even begin to imagine. And that includes cultivating relationships with one another. Dominic can tell you that last night I asked him to work with one of his great ones, one of his great ancestors, in no small way. Like I made light of it in the moment, but he knew that I was dead serious about wanting his help. And there was no one else that I could think of that could bring me that particular help that I needed in that moment to bring my fire down than to turn to my brother and say, can you help? And I made light of it so that it didn't sound as urgent, but he knew that it was urgent. He knew that I was at wit's end. And your ancestors, the ancestors of place, the plant ancestors, and the old ones are the exact same way. When you don't know where else to turn, if Dominic wasn't around when I needed him in that moment, I knew where I would turn next. And those ancestors would have been there to bring things back down, chill me out, at least until the morning, and then start the process over again. And life is going to get in the way. Life's going to happen. There's going to be moments that become stressful, and when you feel like you're losing control. And that's why we cultivate these relationships, because if magic is everywhere and everyone has access to it, and we're not on this planet by ourselves, why wouldn't you turn to one another? Like that's the shortcut. So the questions I want you to think about as we have our discussion tonight, and I don't want anybody to be nobody is going to be put on the spot. I'm not going to ask everyone to answer this question. Answer as you see fit and as you're comfortable. But I'm sincerely interested in this first question. If you're comfortable, from everyone, do you understand better now the difference between magic or witchcraft as a religion versus magic or witchcraft as a worldview? And do you understand that it's not, that when I talk about neo-paganism, and it often can sound like, like I say on the platform, we don't want to post about neo-pagan stuff on the platform. The reason isn't that we don't like neo-paganism. We don't want them there. They're welcome. And there are many members in our community that are neo-pagan. It's that I don't want to start debates over things. I mean, it was tough enough this weekend to have an intelligent debate dealing with fact, not opinion, because they're completely different things, about the pop culture myth that, as a person on the spectrum, I find absurd, that Halloween, because a lot of us have our issues with the Catholic Church, and that the Catholics based Halloween on Samhain. Well, that fails the logical construct, the logical process, because it's easily disproven. Halloween has nothing at all to do with Samhain, because Halloween was originally on May 14th for 500 years, not for 2 weeks, not for a couple of minutes, for 500 friggin' years. So when somebody says Happy Samhain on Halloween and says, well, you just don't know, and you're not Irish, so how would you know? Well, I'm an anthropologist and an historian. I know the history, and I know the history of the Catholic Church and all of its misdeeds. And so, yes, the Feast of All Hallows was on May 15th. And I suspect, now that's where the fact ends. Now, this is where my opinion starts. I suspect that they realized that they didn't accomplish what they wanted to get the pagans to stop their bonfires at Beltane, because they did it. They had their Feast of All Hallows 2 weeks later. So of course you're not going to stop them from having a bonfire when your celebration comes 2 weeks later. So they said, well, we could go to the other cross quarter day, which is in November, on November 6th or 7th, depending on the year. We could go to that cross quarter day. And this time we're going to be clever. We're going to throw our little celebration of All Saints and All Souls just before them. And then maybe people won't want to still have another bonfire later. Well, P.S. it didn't work. As we can see today, we're still having the bonfires in November. We're still celebrating the ancestors and the cross quarter day because it's the cross quarter day. But in just trying to illustrate that, we had one person leave the platform today. After a little nasty gram. We've had someone else tell me I was a dictator. We had like craziness that ensued because people put all of their energy in religion and religious superstition. And what happens with religion is the story keeps getting told and told and told and told, and then people believe it. So paganism is very much like everything that we've seen from 2016 until today in the GOP. Lots of stories, lots of legends, lots of myths, lots of things that aren't really true, but people put their energy in it. The idea that the veil is thinner. I loved Annette made my morning in the midst of being told I was a dictator by someone else. Annette made my morning because she posted this thing that said, of course the veil is thin. It's a fucking veil. It's not the blanket, the comforter. So I said a couple months ago, I don't believe that the veil gets thinner at this time of year. Our heads get thinner. We get less cabados, we less thick-headed, and we become more aware that this portal exists between us and the ancestors. So if you believe that Halloween and Samhain are the same time, that they all occur on October 31st, then energetically you're making the awareness of that thinness of the veil happen on the 31st. So for you, that works. Just the point is that you don't want to let your religious fundamentalism blind you to the history and the facts, because history and facts and truth will always liberate us. And fundamentalism will always occlude our awareness, and it'll always interfere with our magic. And so out of what I thought was compassion, because I imagined foolishly, even though part of me knows that people love their ignorance and they love their mythology more important than facts, I thought if I just tell people the real story, they'll say, wow, that's really interesting. And that makes sense. Because really it was the Catholic Church doing a dirtier deed than just stealing Samhain and throwing it in the disguise of Halloween. But it backfired. So the second question I want you to ask yourself is, if you really look at what you've done, whether you've been with us for a couple months or you've been with us for a couple years, would you say that you're practicing your craft, or are you kind of dabbling in the spells that you find? Are you experimenting? And why? Is it because you haven't until tonight really stopped to think about that metaphor of the car and the fact that magic works? We know it works. We don't have to experiment to see if it works. We just have to see if that particular way of expressing our magic vibes with us or resonates with us. And like for some people, ritual is wonderful. Liturgy and smells and bells and all of the stuff that goes with it helps center us and bring us to the moment. For other people, that's a distraction. Like if I have to do too many steps to any ritual, it's a distraction. I would much rather bring my offerings to the table and say, ancestors, orishas, gods and goddesses, saints, whatever, I want to work with you. I'm here. Let's have a cup of coffee and let's talk about this. Same way I want to deal with the person that has an issue with me. Same way I tried to deal with the person who left the platform today. I said, let's talk about this. I want you to understand, I'm not attacking the people who think it's Samhain yesterday. I'm just saying it helps to know the history, because when we know the history, we're not being as disrespectful to those real spirits of place in Ireland. And we're not changing their story. We're not disrespecting what that was really about. And the reason we know that Samhain was never on October 31st is because at the burial mounds in Ireland, they line up with the sunrise on the cross quarter day. And so there's a whole other part of that tradition that's beautiful and breathtaking. And that's when all they believe that all of the spirits we would call the Fae, what I forget what it is right at this moment in Gaelic, come to bring us together with our ancestors. And it's beautiful because it's, as we heard from Jim and from I think from Adam on Saturday, we get to then commune not just with our ancestors of blood, but the ancestors of place and the ancestors of time and tribe and all of the other ancestors. And then I'd like you to think about as we leave, after we leave tonight, after our discussion, what are your go-to tools for your magical workings? Is there something like, our sigil work something that really makes it easier for you? Because with a sigil, you actually have the ability to burn it when you're done. So the letting go is easier. Is it music? Because of the same thing, when the music is done, it's done. And you've let your energy go into the ether to do its good and perfect work and return to you multiplied. What are the things that work for you? Maybe it's a candle for the same reason. Candles eventually burn down, and the working is done. So I want you to think of what are the go-to tools, because once you know what your go-to tools are, you don't have to worry about all the other stuff. You don't have to, we talked earlier about, it might've been before we started, Judika Iles's book and how, having a book of 5,000 spells is great. It's interesting. I'm nerdy that way. I like to see what other people use for their spell work. But I would go nuts if I had to have, a 3-inch thick compendium of spells in order to do magic, because you're not going to carry that giant book with you everywhere you go. And so once I know what I can work with, I don't have to have 7,000 herbs. I have maybe in my cabinet that you can't just off camera, the cabinet where all of my Materia Magica is, there's maybe 30 or 40 herbs. There's members of my family who've been practicing even longer than me. They have like 10. That's all they work with. And their magic is every bit as powerful as mine, or as the person who works with 5,000 spells or 10,000 spells. There are people for whom, like I said, that doesn't mean that the ones who have major drawn out ritual are less magical or less effective. If that ritual brings you to the presence of your ancestors, then that's exactly what you should do. And don't let anybody ever get you off, tell you no. But if you're looking for a different way, if that doesn't vibe with you, find what your go-to tools are. And that's the place where experimentation comes in. You're not experimenting to see if magic works. Know that it works. But experiment to find what it is that's your personal expression. Some artists paint, other artists sing, some artists dance. They're all still artists. So that is the presentation part of tonight. Where's my stop share? Now I want to hear from you and what resonated with that. If you have any questions, please ask them. And if you feel like sharing any of those answers to those questions or reflections on those questions or whatever, now I want to hear from you. And just unmute yourself. Don't raise your hands. It's too distracting for me to figure out whose hand's raised.
So I unmuted. So this is so big. I love this so much. So thank you so much for doing this. I feel like this could be hours long conversation.
That's why it's going to be in 2 parts.
But yeah, I think I've been taking little notes here, but I realized that the biggest moment I had when we were doing just even the first run through with Stregonoria, was because it's all of these things. It's this piece. I feel like if there's one thing that I've taken that like blew my mind open the most from your teachings, it has been that this idea, I like to put it really crudely, is that we can just do it. Like I don't need to put on a robe and do the thing, and it doesn't have to be like all the things you just said, and how, yes, we can use this, and yes, it could be this moon, and yes, it could do those things, but it's almost like, those are like like in a video game, those would be like bonus jumps or like a turbo boost, but you're still playing the game. Like, so I feel like, to me, that idea, it's like, wait a minute, oh my gosh, it doesn't have to be this 50-step thing. And as a person with an ADD brain, what you just said about it being too many steps, I'm like laughing, because I have this like rule of three, but my rule of three is like, if it's more than 3 steps, I'm gonna get lost. Like that's my rule of three. It's like, I need to like keep it simple, just like blah, 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 blah. And then I can add stuff in. So like that was such a big deal. The idea that like you can just do the witchcraft. We could just, and now this is the irony, is like come full circle a year later into like reframing this for myself, has been that now when I've attended a few rituals, and I've gone to see people I know who do very big, like, ritual magic or more ceremonial stuff, very neo-pagan stuff. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm that person I'm not irreverent to what the intention is, but I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, like I'm just sitting here like, okay, we're gonna do the thing, and they're like, oh, do you want to do this? Sure, I've done this a million times. Fine, I'll draw the circle. I'll do the, but my heart's not in it, because I don't need that. And it's like, oh my gosh, how, so my personal evolution in there too, but like that idea that if that works for them, they need to draw that circle with the athame, go for it. That's a beautiful thing for you to do. I'm kind of glad that at 42, I'm like, I don't need to do that anymore. I'm just gonna like put my herbs on the table and do whatever. And that's a huge deal, because yeah, I think that like that's such an enormous shift. So like, just thank you for that, because it's a
You're
huge
welcome.
thing.
I'd say that like that sort of approach works in so many areas of our life. I remember while I was in the monastery, a priest who was given a dispensation by the Pope to start an ashram, along with my refuge guru, who was also a priest who started an ashram, both of them Benedictine. But Father Bede Griffiths said, okay, so you love the Eucharist, you love the liturgy. I was one of these people who that ritual brought me to a transcendental place. He said, now I want you to, and I thought it was amazing that at this one Eucharist, we were all sitting down on the ground in a yoga posture, celebrating Eucharist. And I said, oh, this feels even better. And he said, oh, just wait till tomorrow when all of the tourists or, the retreatants are gone. And now he said, now I want you to celebrate the Eucharist without moving. And I was like, what? We're going to lose all the liturgy. We're going to lose all the power. That's where all of the buildup comes from. And he said, just do it. And when we're done, you could say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. Or you could say, it's not working for me, and get up and leave the mat. But I want you to try. And it was the most amazing transcendental liturgy of the Eucharist that I ever experienced. And other than when I have to, like for funerals, I've never celebrated any other way that liturgy than sitting perfectly still, without moving, without, as we were talking before, no magic hands over the cup and the bread, because what he forced me to do was to recognize that it wasn't the magic Jesus cookies and the glass of wine that was becoming the body of Christ. It was the people that were there that became the body of Christ. That is an act of magic. It's transcendental. It's a transformation of who we are as people. Every act of magic we do is transcendental magic. You're working with that's the definition of transcendence, is you're working with the energy, shifting it to become something else. It's alchemy. So thank
And
you.
I I would add, it's as simple as breathing. You know, we breathe, and we breathe to exist, but it's that in and out of the prana that connects us to the energetic movement in ourselves. So it's not anything. I've never been big for the, spreading the hands over it, but being still and being attentive to what is around me. And so if it's, a piece of string, if it's something, a stone that I pick up from the ground, it's as natural as breathing. And I think that's how I was trained by my grandmother, that it's everywhere, and it's part of it, it's part of the Judeo-Christian ethic that she also mixed in with it. It was the rosary beads and the malokia going at the same time for my grandmother, but and my other grandmother, it was the rosary beads and the racing form. So it's whatever your tools are. And I think the simplicity of it's as natural as breathing. Everything, breath is magic. The fact that we breathe is magic. And that the air that I breathe is the air that all my ancestors and all your ancestors have breathed in and out as well.
That's beautifully put. Thank you.
If I can I add like one more thing, because
Sure.
there was something, because I wrote, I feel like this connected when you were talking. I remember I had the memory of the placebo effect, which is one of my favorite, like, not, I don't want to derail things, but it's one of those things that I think is one of the biggest freaking deals in science ever, and no one talks about it. But the idea that oh, that's just the placebo effect. You take this thing and like half the time it actually cures you, but it's not anything. And it's like, hold the phone. You just said that you're taking medicine that's not medicine because you believe that it's medicine. It works. That is a huge deal. Like, that's science confirming magic and then just dismissing it. So to me, like, that fits right in with, like, am I making, like, to me, like, that's kind of a lot of what is being said here too, is this idea of like, when you're talking about the spells, from fiction and like these ideas, it's like, but if you're invested, if you're there, like, anything can be real. That's it, right? Like, it sounds the same to me.
Yeah.
And that's a huge deal.
If anybody listening wants to know what spirit guide, what spirit animal they have tonight, when the lights are out, light a candle and say Expector Patronum, and see what happens. And you may like think it's absolutely silly, but just see what happens. That's when you that magic exists. So why wouldn't those words? Somebody had to make up every tradition on the planet. Somebody had to make up every word on the planet. The thing, we call this a glass, but that's because somebody made up the word glass. It could have been called something else. So if you energetically charge the words that you say, it doesn't matter what those words are, you get the result. And and that's why we have to respect the people who do ritual magic, because those are the things they charged. They want the pretty wand, great. They want the crystal necklace and the crystal head thing. I mean, look at the crystal necklace. Before the show or the class, Annette and I were talking about how some of we realize that stuff is, if you really look at it, a little bit silly, but every tradition has its little bit of silliness to it because somebody's imagination made it up. I wear black nail polish or cover my head because that's my tradition. To somebody else, that might be stupid. Like, they might think, you don't have to do that. What do you got to cover your head for? And they're right. What do you have to cover your head for? But I have to, because it's my tradition. And that's where I've energetically put my focus on protecting that place where I merge with my divine ancestors and my divine self and with the divine within me. So we protect it. Somebody else, it might be their feet, like, for as much as I believe that way, somebody else might say, oh no, you got to take your shoes off before you walk in the temple, or else you're not going to be able to connect with the divine.
I'll go.
Yeah.
So I thought it was funny that you used the car reference today, or earlier, because it's funny, throughout my life, even when I didn't realize I was doing magic, whenever I would fixate on something, yeah, guess what? It would happen. And probably about 12 years ago, I bought a Ford Fusion Hybrid, and it was when they first came out.
I'm sorry.
I know. And I remember reading the reviews because it was like one of the first hybrids Ford had, and I wanted to make sure I was doing the right thing. You know, I was really into like the eco-conscious, and I didn't want to pollute the environment and all that. And I remember reading on a board that one of the weird issues they were having with this car was that they would spontaneously just shut off when they were driving. I went ahead and I bought the car, and guess what? The only problem I ever had with that car was that I ended up having to trade it in, because one day when it was 104 degrees out and I was coming back from Long Island, I got stuck on the Verrazano Bridge with no air conditioning because the car decided it didn't want to run anymore. And I just kept thinking to myself, I made this happen. If I had never been on that message board and read about this particular problem, I mean, what were the chances of this happening to me? Because I made it happen. I remember when I was pregnant with my kids, and I said to myself, I don't care if it's a boy or a girl, I just want them to be healthy, and please God, don't let them have my husband's feet. Guess what they got? So it's just so funny how, you know, it doesn't matter, like you said, if it's real or not real. It's what you're going to believe in, and it's what you put your focus on, what you put your emotion in, what you just, you know, what we what's the word I'm looking for, what we fixate on.
Yeah.
But as far as what's the difference between religion or witchcraft, that's something I think this class helped me to figure out, because I remember when I first started this journey, of course, like so many of us, thinking that being Wiccan was being a witch, and it was the same thing, and it was witchcraft. Going like, I left the Catholic Church because I just didn't like this, you know, Jesus is the supreme being and you have to worship him and all of this other nonsense. And then being, okay, well, I don't believe in a horned God, and I don't know that I can get behind this, like, the goddess is in charge too thing. So, you know, where does that leave me? And now I've just, you know, it's not, I don't need to worship somebody to make this happen. It's not a worshiping, it's a more of a communing. And it's like, I don't have to bow down to anybody. They can bow down to me if they want to, you know, whatever, because I'm just as powerful as them, as long as I believe that I am. So yeah, that's been really interesting, that shift in the thought process over the last couple of years, just kind of understanding that it isn't this higher power that's controlling everything. It's me. And I have to say that is kind of, that leads into the second part. You know, am I dabbling, or am I enjoying the real magic? I think that's where sometimes my head gets twisted, because I forget that. And then I have to constantly keep reminding myself, you know, it's not anything outside of you. It is you, and it's there. So just do it. And do it whether you have this perfect spell, or whether, you know, you found it in the book, or you made it up at the top of your head in 5 minutes. Just do it, because if you believe in it, it's going to work. And, you know, because even when you don't realize you're doing it, as you know, with the car or my kid's feet, it just happens. And I think just the last thing that I made a note about, my tool, I don't know why, and I think you said it, I didn't know why, but when you said it, it made sense to me. I happen to like candle magic most of the time, because it is that I can see that visual representation of the candle burning down, and then it's over, you know, it's done. Cleaning up my stuff, I'm not thinking about it anymore. It's just going to happen, and that's just what it is. So
Thank you. It's been exciting to see the transformation in you in the last year. See, even like I was stopped dead in my tracks when I saw the passage from Judica's book, because if you would have asked me who the last person in our entire community would be to be looking at that particular book by Judica, I would have said you. And I was like, all right, she is in the moment and just open to the fact that you just cultivate a relationship. I especially loved it because it was Saint Simon. And I've cultivated a relationship with him, and she was spot on in her description. But like, I would say that that's why somebody like Adam, and if you listen to Adam's class, any of you on Saturday, so many really powerful things in there, but why he's so successful at his magical practice. And because he understands the importance too of the letting it go. And I can now tell you, just because it's now public knowledge, that, you know, Adam and his husband have been working on and magically preparing for having their own school for a decade. He said over a decade. And now it's getting ready to happen. And like, to those of us on the outside, like, I can't believe it didn't happen sooner, because they have all the right stuff for it to happen, but they didn't push it. They let it go. And he did. The big takeaway from his class, I thought, was that was the best explanation of the right way to have a magical name that I've ever heard in my life. Because there's a lot of people with magical names, Honey Boo Boo, Storm, Storm Cloud, Lightning Bolt, that just sound ridiculous and pretentious. But when you do it the way that somebody like Adam or Storm Fairy Wolf or so many other people that I could think of, the way that they do it, the actual taking of the name is magic in and of itself. And in some traditions, like some of the initiatory traditions, you're given the name by your spiritual teacher, your guru, your godfather, godmother. But the part of your brain in science that makes the magic happen, and we'll talk about this later, is the prefrontal cortex, which doesn't listen to the little words like not or don't let the kids have their father's feet. It just said kids have their father's feet. And it manifests into the universe, the energy, to shift the energy to make that happen. And that's why we don't do spells that say, I don't want to be broke anymore, because all you're doing is energizing broke. That's why you don't say, I need, because you're energizing need. And so, kudos to you for reaching that point of realizing that, now I think in the case of the Ford Fusion, Ford shares part of the responsibility for that. But you're absolutely right that it happened on the Verrazzano parking lot was because energetically you were just speeding up the process of Ford Fusion doing what it was actually built to do, die. But thank you for that. Francesca, I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, this is why I love this community, because honestly, I'm always so repulsed by anyone telling me what to do. And the only reason I do spells in the physical realm is because I feel like I'm told to do it, like to memorialize that which happens in the astral plane or in my energetic working in my brain, wherever it happens. Y'all know what I'm talking about. But there's like a call or a nudge to memorialize it in the physical realm in some way. And usually it's so simple. So like to what Deo was saying around it being simple, and then Annette being disgusted by the elaborate rituals. Rituals are just so simple to me. When I feel like I've crossed a threshold, this is like for me, crossing a threshold, it's symbolized with some form of like a flour or a meal, or if I don't have that, I'll like rip up pieces of bread as like earth to earth, and then very coarse salt on top of it. And like, and if I have rose petals, like to just anoint it with some beauty so that it doesn't hurt as I cross the threshold. Like, let it be fragrant and beautiful, please. And I will symbolically cross that threshold and then sit on the other side of the threshold on the ground and just be on that side of this thing. Like, yes, I've crossed over.
Wow.
But that's the simplicity of it. I mean, I know it's already happened, but I just need my body to catch up with what my soul has already done in a way.
Right on. That was beautiful.
Thank you for receiving it.
Yeah, Dominic.
So to talk about the fiction part, and a lot of the fiction, and we're going to talk about like from the TV movie perspective on November 7th.
I can't wait.
But, yeah, so that's an example of how, you know, these themes are present in pop culture. But from a literary perspective, a lot of these fiction authors, some of them are practitioners themselves, or they may have studied or researched it. So when you read the book, you're like, there's something familiar about it. And I'm going to use Andrea's book as an example, because I read it, the Winship series. And I'm reading the book. It's enjoyable. You know, you want to find out what happens with the family. And then there's a part where there's a spell in the book. And I'm like, she just disguised a spell in the fiction book. And I'm like, I was like, and I asked her, I was like, is this book semi-autobiographical by any chance? Because it's like there's a couple of things here like that are like too, you know, too close to home and resonate too well. So I think a lot of authors, you see in their work, like they take like there's a series coming out, The Wheel of Time, that's going to be on Amazon Prime. That's yeah, exactly. I'm a fan too. And like there's a lot of like philosophy about magic and religion and mythology like in that world, because the author was drawing, you know, from, you know, his experience and his research. And so I don't think it's, you know, it's bad to use a spell from a book, because that spell, it might be fictional, but it was inspired from something.
Yeah, in The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, there was an actual old and supposedly very secret spell from the Italian tradition that they did verbatim. They changed one word, which I found very interesting, which word they changed. I would have never thought to change that particular word, but then after I thought about it, I was like, oh yeah. And I am friends with one of the writers, and he said, oh yeah, that was definitely a person from your tradition who gave us that spell. And you look at the magicians just took Segnatura and did it in a different way with you know, clever hand motions, but they clearly had to know. Yeah, and Annette just said, and how so many of us know that Tolkien was obviously tapped into the earth. Yeah, so I'm so looking forward to next Sunday to your session. Anyone else? We're in our last 15 minutes of the evening.
I'll go.
All right.
Hi everybody. I joined late, so thanks for having me, and nice to meet you. Okay, so the first question was about, okay, I just want to talk about the car analogy, because I think that makes sense to me. I feel like where I come into this course, and I'm doing the 101 at the same time, is like knowing the car works, but not knowing which one's the gas pedal. Starting to learn what buttons do what, but I've been experimenting. So that's where it's like a little bit of a gray area, because I'm glad to have these courses to have the car manual. And I think that works. I mean, if we follow the analogy further, it's like the car doesn't really need a manual, but your mind drives the car. Anyway, your mind drives the car. But so in trying to do that, I've had a lot of really cool experiences, and yesterday was kind of one of them, where we go up to this waterfall and eat the mushrooms. And I've just been asking ancestors to sing through me. And because I know that they've been singing for a long time, and it's just their pipes. And I feel like that's been working. I still like I ask if they want to share songs or whatever, and feel like some come out. So that's been like a big way of doing it for me, and kind of like incorporating into the mundane, you know, just like in that same way. It's not like a ceremony, but it is like a ceremony. It's just like whatever it wants to sing. What was the second part, John Michael? What was the second part of that question?
Whether you dabble or wait, that's the third part of the question. Rose has them right there. Is it the dabble part?
Yes, that's the second
Yeah,
part. Is
whether
the
you're
dabbling.
Dabbling. No, I think it's serious for me. I think it's there. Like that's the car analogy, is like I think the car is there and the car drives. But
you just made that analogy 10 times better, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then the third part was like what speaks to me, like the mediums that speak to me, and definitely like food and herbs, plants, fungi. I try to put it into everything. I'm definitely like those. In terms of like practice, I've definitely viewed like yoga and breathing and physical movement as medicine, and magic, but always continuing to like learn through those, and trying to have, it's always interesting having those in conversation. We talk about this on John Michael, like trying to put this lifetime learned practices that are magical in conversation with the ancestors. I've been trying to open that up more so that they can hear me from thousands of miles away or wherever they might be. Trying to call and be like, this is what I'm working on. What do you think about that? And music, because like I was saying, it's just always been there. It really speaks to me, and I think it's a very easy way to communicate. And then more recently, getting into like the candles and fire, and just trying to see what's in there. Because I think, like, to link the second and the third, like I think it's there. I believe it's there, but I just have not experienced it enough to see what's there. So I appreciate y'all sharing your experiences and like giving me hints and clues of what might be ways to incorporate, involve, and like evolve those practices.
Right on. I want to thank you for that. I want to also let you know that you inspired part of what's coming for another class very soon, in a very thoughtful question that Nick asked. Like, I think he was with us for like 2 weeks when he asked this question, and it just really like jazzed me to get this question. And it's something that I had planned for the advanced course, and but I hadn't planned it in the way, just like I would have never thought of a car manual, because I'm not, because I suck at like anything automotive and mechanical. That's just not my thing. But yeah, that's such a beautiful addition to that analogy. And Nick said, well, we were talking about vibrational frequencies. And what I want everybody to understand, and we'll talk in depth about this, is everything I give in that 101 course, particularly a great illustration is the vibrational frequency module. Remember that you can't take something in a vacuum, because all of us are in relationship to everything else. Our tradition is animistic, if nothing. And so vibrational frequency, if you play a pure frequency at a particular hertz, that frequency may have a different impact on me than it will on you, because it's the relationship of that frequency to my frequency and where my imbalances are. And so it may take something a little off that frequency to properly tune me, and you a little off that frequency to tune you. And all of our other magical workings are the same. So if you're reading a spell and that spell says, so you need to use rue, and you need to use time, and you need to use, a red candle, and for whatever reason you keep seeing the color purple, and maybe oregano instead of rue, then there's probably a good chance your ancestors are saying, hey, why don't you try it this way and do that? Don't, and that's where you don't do it as an experiment. In that moment, you say, all right, that's why we cultivate relationships with the plants, and the plant ancestors and our blood ancestors and the old ones, is because they're going to give us the benefit of their wisdom, just like we give one another here. And so if they're giving you a little nudge and saying, get a purple candle and get oregano, maybe they see something in your life that you're working on that their perspective is a little clearer. And so they say, no, you think you need to work on, we'll say you need to work on money. And you got the green candle going and you're doing all this stuff. But what it really is that you need to work on deserving, not money. And then when you resolve the deserving, so they nudge you in the direction of correspondences toward being more open, more receptive, and believing that you deserve that abundance. The abundance takes care of itself. Now you don't have to do a spell for money, because now the money starts coming in, because now you recognize you deserve it, because the money was circulating all around you, because the money is just an expression of the divine. And so you say, hey, I deserve this, and this stuff comes. So anyone else before we wrap up?
I would just want to say, Nick, thank you very much, because you talked about the magic of song. And I wrote myself a note that magic is in all the arts, whether it's writing, singing, dancing, painting, acting, whatever it is, that's magic. So I was really glad, Nick, and thank you. And I'd love to hear you sing sometime.
Yeah, we have a session that's going to be coming on that. Those of you who have seen that I go out there and I'm willing to embarrass myself, especially, by the way, Rose, that beautiful voice. Rose is worried she's going to sing. I was like, oh my, I'm just going to listen to this again. You have a kick-ass voice. And after I got COVID, the doctor said, you got to go on Smule, which I thought was absurd, because I really thought, and still do a little bit, think that it's an app that was developed somewhere in Asia, and most of who asks me to sing are girls who, after you sing with them, they want to know if you want to see their breasts, and clearly I don't. And but so I think it was actually kind of it was a different app before. There was Musical.ly before that. And it was really one of those kind of like disguised hookup apps. But I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And he said, do it. And I thought, well, if I'm going to have to do this to repair the damage from COVID to my diaphragm mostly, but also to my vocal cords, which that damage might be, medically irreparable. But I believe that magically it can be repaired. The real magical transformation was in connecting with people who like couldn't carry a tune in a bucket if they tried, and then they say to you with all sincerity, will you sing this song with me? And now I have far from a good voice anymore, but they say, will you sing this song with me? And you sing, and you see that person just like blossom, like you just shared a moment of magic with them. So that as much as I don't like the, hey, you want to see my vajayjay, thanks for singing the way we were, I don't think I'll ever leave, because there are those other people who say, nobody else will sing with me, because especially like there's a lot of Filipinos on there, and they don't speak really good English, and they say, nobody will sing with me because of my accent. And like, that just makes me like want to cry a little bit and just say, I just sing. Who cares if you pronounce the words right? Because you could sing something in Pinoy that I would slaughter. So it's relative, and you're putting your heart and you're putting that magic to there, and there's magic in the vibration. That's why spells work. So thank you for that. And I want to wrap up tonight by be mindful of the time by saying that I truly do hope with everything that I am, that if anybody ever feels like I'm dictating to you what you have to do and you have to do it this way, and if you don't do this way, or if you disagree with me, you're horrible. Please know that nobody has ever been asked to leave this platform because they disagreed with me, period. Nobody has ever been dictated to how they need to do anything other than that they have to treat people with respect. So people have been asked to leave because they've been disrespectful to other people. They can be disrespectful to me. I let that roll off my back because I'm a big girl. I can throw it right back at them and more effectively. But if you disrespect somebody else in my family, then it doesn't change. It doesn't stop me from love. There's nobody that I've kicked out that I don't still love, that I don't still work for and hope the very best for them on their journey, wherever it takes them. But I also do the working to keep them far away, because I'm not going to ever let somebody abuse another person. But if you ever feel that I am, as was told to me today, a dictator, that this isn't a collective, please understand, as a community, we are a collective. I've spent the majority of my life in a monastery, or half of my life now, because I'm getting terribly older. So now we're at the 50-50 mark. But community means everything to me. So this is a collective. It is also a school, and it is my school. I invested in this. I put all the effort into this, and it is only through the amazing work of our faculty that this school has bloomed into a diverse tapestry that it wouldn't have been if I would have continued as I did for the first couple years of teaching stregoneria, because that's my tradition. So the tapestry was the colors of my tradition. But now we have all these beautiful traditions, and so it's my school, but our faculty are what brings it value. And I have never, to the best of my knowledge, ever, not to the best of my knowledge, period, I have never told any faculty member what they can or can't teach. I have asked faculty to keep it relative to witchcraft, magic, and esotericism, because we're not going to teach auto mechanics and dance and anything else. We're teaching what we teach, and we're going to try and get some grants to increase the tools that our faculty have. But if you ever have a problem where you feel like I'm being a tyrant, please come to me privately and tell me. I will just say that my personality, my characteristics are, if you don't behave like an adult and come to me privately, but instead passive aggressively try to call me out publicly, I'm also still Sicilian, and I will respond to a public calling out publicly. Sometimes I'll respond publicly and say, you're right. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that was being hurtful, or I didn't realize that was that I didn't understand you. But I'll still do that publicly, because you called me out publicly. I owe you the responsibility of apologizing publicly. But if you're wrong and you're calling me out for something and your facts are wrong and you're accusing me of something I didn't do, I will eviscerate you publicly as well, because you chose the path that we take. But I would really prefer that you just come to me and say, you could come to me and yell at me and say, I think you're an asshole. And chances are 50-50, you could be right. In that moment, I could be an asshole. In many moments, I could be an asshole. I could even give you a list. But please come to me, because nothing could hurt me more. And there is a dagger in my heart tonight, because somebody I adore said that I am operating this platform as a dictator. And because we're a community, if we were just a school, I would never tell you that. But we're a family, and I feel like I owe it to you to tell you that I'm struggling with that, and will probably struggle with that for a couple of weeks until I find a way to ameliorate that pain. But also, I tell you that because I would really appreciate your holding space for me. I know some people listening, they're not here tonight yet, but I love them and appreciate their perspective too. They hate when we throw around terms like hold space for me, because that does get bandied about with recklessness. But I mean, truly hold that space. in your heart for a moment and just say, hey, you know, if my ancestors can come to the aid of John Michael with his ancestors and help him find his way out of this, because this is a moment, I may know lots of shit, but in this moment, I don't know how the fuck to move beyond this pain. I'll figure it out. But the reality is, in this moment, that pain is acute and brutal. So with that, I thank you. I love you, each and every one of you, without exception. And we will see you in 2 weeks for part 2. Oh, no, we'll see you actually next Sunday. Oh yeah, I'll be there, of course, because I have to record it. It's your other class I'm going to miss, the tarot class. I have to watch on replay.
All the cards. Right?
Yeah, but I'm going to watch that on replay because I'm really looking forward to that. I've always wanted to learn the Italian cartomancy. So thank you all. Love you guys. This will be up on the web in probably about an hour.